Tonight on Bridge City News, the Alberta government announces more cuts and how they may impact our public sector. October's Autism Awareness Month. BCN's Loris Alexander spoke with one family who shares their story of dealing with the spectrum. And the Poppy campaign is underway. We caught up with a spokesperson from the Lethbridge Legion to talk about the significance of the little red flower.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The Alberta government is looking at rolling back wages for more than 180,000 public sector workers. Finance Minister Travis Toews will ask arbitrators to impose an average 2% wage cut in 30 upcoming public sector wage cases. Now, in some instances, however, the UCP will ask for reductions as high as 5%. Toews says he has respect for what public sector workers do, but they account for more than half of government expenses and is higher than comparable provinces. The opposition NDP called Toews' announcement a bullying tactic and said labour strife is forthcoming. AUPE Vice President Susan Slade spoke on behalf of provincial workers.
Our members are extremely angry. They have been voicing their anger and they're upset with this government for months now. And recently we had our convention and over 1,000 delegates and activists did unanimously endorse a resolution that fully supported any group of members that take direct action against their employer. So this was a serious discussion and a serious decision that was made in recognition that this government will stop at nothing by attacking the frontline workers consistently over and over again in the last few months.
Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Newdorf weighed in from Edmonton.
Lethbridge is 53% public sector workers. That's a pretty significant amount of the working force in Lethbridge. So I want to acknowledge their frustrations and concerns with this announcement. But I do also recognize the government's revision in light of the fiscal realities that we found out after the McKinnon panel report, and as we had the summer to review the state of affairs. The government's revenue is down about $6 billion a year from the NDP projections. So that's a very stark reality difference from where we thought we were taking things over from.
The last time the AUPE members took a pay cut was all the way back in 1993. There were more fireworks at the Alberta Legislature yesterday as Lethbridge West MLA Shannon Phillips blasted Premier Jason Kenney and had a little something to do with Alberta Finance Minister Travis Toews and the budget.
Why won't the Premier fire the worst finance minister in Alberta history?
Because we already did last April, Mr. Speaker. Biggest deficit in Canada, $60 billion in new debt, 6 credit downgrades, on track for $100 billion in debt, higher taxes on everything, the carbon tax, higher income taxes, higher taxes on employers, higher property taxes, a jobs crisis, the worst economic record since the Great Depression. That's why we fired him in April, Mr. Speaker.
Understanding hate crimes and hate incidents is the goal of the Alberta Hate Crimes Committee. They held a presentation on the topic last night, along with the City of Lethbridge, police, the Lethbridge Interfaith Network, and the John Humphrey Centre for Peace and Human Rights. Also in attendance were members of the community who were concerned about the overall increase in crime that has plagued the city recently. After almost 34 years of service, the BK-117 Stars Air ambulance flew to Lethbridge for the last time. This was the first Stars helicopter to fly in our province, picking up a premature baby in Lethbridge in 1985. Stars Chief Operating Officer Mike Lamacchia shared how they picked up their VIP, or very important patient.
If I go back to one of our VIPs, which is a very important patient, Kelly Waldron, who is we transported her in 1985. She was a premature baby, and we transported her in to signify the importance of her. Our call signs on our new aircraft is KLY to represent Kelly. So, there's a lot of great stories here in Lethbridge. Lethbridge is our busiest site in Alberta. We frequent Lethbridge once a week, so it's really important that we continue to serve the citizens in southern Alberta. And but once a week, if you think about it, once a week we come to Lethbridge.
STARS is in the process of replacing all of the old fleet with 9 new helicopters, each of which will cost around $13 million. 22 local organizations known as Team Lethbridge are heading to Edmonton to advocate on behalf of the city. For the 6th time, Economic Development Lethbridge has organized the trip to find ways to work with the province and to share what our city has to offer.
Everybody has their own priority, everybody has something they want from government, but that's really not the intent of this mission. We go as a group, we go as a united front. We're here to promote Lethbridge. We talk about why Lethbridge matters. And again, it's about building relationships with the province. How do we solve mutual problems? I mean, the fiscal reality is what it is, so let's not dwell on that. Let's focus on how we move forward together. We need the province just as much as they need Lethbridge. So how do we work together?
One organization that will be attending the trip is Build Lethbridge. Building, Industry and Land Development is a group that will benefit from the new provincial budget. Jason Kenney has tripled the investment in trades to $6 million a year by 2022-2023.
The government has recognized that there's going to be this gap in skilled workers as people are retiring out of the trades. So they're investing quite a bit in Careers Next Generation. They're also looking at women in building, and these are all things that touch on our industry. And we need to make sure that we've got a labor force that's trained to come in as that group is retiring. And it's really important. There's also a perception that we need to take care of, that trades is something you default into. It's not. It's a career that our youth should be thinking about and thinking of entering, because it's a fantastic career.
The UCP government says the investment will help 6,000 students access paid internships and training each and every year. Throughout October, the United Way hosted its Coats for Kids and Families campaign. Donated coats and winter gear will help low-income and homeless residents prepare for the winter.
Something as simple as having a winter coat can really help a family avoid some of those financial pressures that happen in the winter. Bills are always up to cover heating and electric costs, and even something as simple as a winter coat can really help a family to not have to decide between, which of my bills do I not pay this month so that I can afford to buy new coats for the kids, or make those tough choices. There are actually people in our community who have to do that. So if we can help to alleviate some of that financial pressure, that's one of our goals.
Local ATB Financial and TD Canada Trust branches will welcome the donations, along with the United Way office located at 1277 3rd Avenue South. October is Autism Awareness Month. A Lethbridge family who are autism advocates talk about living with a child with autism. The Rodicks talk about why it's important to raise awareness, but more urgently, they have a message of acceptance and inclusion. BCN's Loris Alexander spoke with the family about their challenges with the spectrum.
Go and take them home, and I'm moving.
Jude Rudick was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder when he was about 3 years old.
When he wasn't talking by 18 months, that was my first sign. And of course, when you Google things, you can get some misinformations and things. So when I started reading that there was other flags, and it's saying, do they toe walk? Yes, he does.
The Rudicks didn't know much about autism before Jude's diagnosis, so they learned as much as they could in order to support their son. Now both parents are advocates for the disorder and serve on the board of Chinook Autism Society.
We do lots of things around town. For instance, we're doing interviews, helping out with the search and rescue, how they deal with children on the spectrum. We're setting up reports and stuff for the police service so we can help them on how to deal with individuals on the spectrum.
When you meet a person with autism, you meet one person with autism. No child or adult is the same. So getting that awareness out there, knowing that there's such a diverse group of people, now it's how do we not only accept them, but adapt to them.
For parents with recently diagnosed children with autism, Brandon says there are no shortage of support services in Alberta.
We have Chinook Autism Society here in Lethbridge, Inclusion Lethbridge as well. They're a great help.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
The Poppy campaign is now underway. According to a spokesperson with the Lethbridge Legion, it begins on the last Friday of October. Glenn Miller says the Governor-General receives their poppy first, then the Lieutenant Governor, trickling down to the general public. It's followed by Tag Day, where veterans around the country tag people with poppies.
This year, the Poppy campaign has just started, with Tag Day recently completed. And so now this is the season, not just on Remembrance Day, but between now and Remembrance Day, we would encourage to see a lot of red poppies on all Canadians' of all ages, just to recognize the act of remembrance and what we're leading up to on Remembrance Day. Poppies are always free, and we don't sell them, but we kindly take the donations, and those donations go to help veterans and their families.
You can pick up a poppy at most local businesses or the Legion. Now, they're free, but donations are always appreciated. And with the Poppy campaign also comes the start of the National Student Poster and Literary Contest.
It's a national contest that is run by the Royal Canadian Legion, and the deadline is November 30th. And the categories are color, black and white posters, essays, or a poem. And it's broken down by different age groups. Individual branches take the local entries from students, judge them, and then those winners from the branch level gets elevated to the provincial level for consideration. And the very national winner is flown on behalf of the Legion to attend the Remembrance Day activity in Ottawa.
Students from Lethbridge have been recognized in the past for their work provincially and nationally in this contest. You can include Sam Lowen in that group. He is an LCI student who won the National Poster Contest back in 2009. There are rumblings within the federal Tory caucus about the leadership of Andrew Scheer. Now, some are saying he may need to be replaced. One of our regular political contributors, Brian Lilly, says it's making for some interesting times on the Hill.
I think Andrew Scheer has two choices. He either has to clear house, shake up the house, kind of like a general manager when the hockey team's not doing well. Do you fire the coach? Do you trade players? Those are your options. If not, and you can't find a fix, then maybe you have to be the one that steps aside.
Mr. Lilly will have more on Scheer's leadership and where the Conservatives go from here. That's coming up after business news. The mayors of both Regina and Saskatoon met with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau recently. Regina Mayor Michael Foucher says he passed on concerns he has been hearing about the oil and gas sector and the Trans Mountain Pipeline. He says Trudeau acknowledged with the election results and no Liberal MPs in Saskatchewan or Alberta that there's been a deficiency in Ottawa's policies and approach in the West. Saskatoon Mayor Charlie Clark says he told Trudeau that Ottawa has not given priority to regional issues. Several hundred people gathered at a Toronto Public Library to protest a speaker who was brought in to discuss feminism. A number of people within the LGBTQ2+ community called on the library to cancel the talk by Megan Murphy titled Gender Identity, What Does It Mean for Society, the Law, and Women? The library, however, allowed the event to continue, citing the right to free speech.
The library has already within its policy the ability to deny room rentals to people who are likely to promote viewpoints which will encourage discrimination. So that's already their policy. We're just asking the Toronto Public Library to enforce their own policy and not allow events that foster hate and discrimination in our community to go ahead in publicly funded spaces.
I'm here to say very strongly that trans rights are human rights and that we are not going back because someone calls herself a feminist, decides she wants to be transphobic. And this is transphobia, and that's what it looks like and that's what it sounds like. It is not feminist because she doesn't include all women. She doesn't include trans women. I mean, there was a time that feminists include women of color. This is exactly the same as that.
Dozens of people demonstrated outside of the Ontario Legislature yesterday against the province's vaccination law. A court challenge was launched recently, and many argue it is a violation of parents' rights.
We want to, where there's a risky thing like vaccines, that we want to be able to make a choice whether or not our children should be able to get them. And that's already allowed by law in Canada. It's protected by the Charter as our right to choose. But we don't want to have barriers put in place of our charter rights. We have now to sign a form that is not our beliefs, but it's supposed to be an affidavit. The Constitution says it has to be. We're allowed by, Section 2 that we're allowed to have a freedom of conscience and religion, but we don't if we have to sign something from someone else's beliefs to say that we're agreeing with all these other things that you're saying, then it's no longer our belief, and then it's no longer freedom of speech.
A suicide crisis has been declared within the Sheshatshiu Innu First Nation in central Labrador. Officials say within the past week alone, there have been 10 suicide attempts. Chief Eugene Hart says over the past year, there have been 14 natural deaths, including the tragic drowning of a young woman last weekend, and it's taken its toll on his community. Hart says he's reached out to help from a number of organizations, including the RCMP, the Premier's Office, and Health Canada. South of the border, officials say a new wind-driven wildfire in Southern California near the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library has now grown to more than 400 acres since it began less than 24 hours ago. A spokesperson for the library says it is being protected by firefighters as the wildfire burns nearby in hills northwest of Los Angeles. Meanwhile, in Northern California, forecasters are calling for calmer winds. Hot, dry weather will continue to make fire conditions dangerous, however.
At the time of year where we haven't seen any moisture in our fuel beds for an extended period of time, the fuels are critically dry. They are receptive to new fire as well as fire spread.
Good news is after we get through this wind event, things do look favorable for the next 5 to 7 days, where we'll get into a more tranquil weather pattern. No rain in the forecast, but also no more offshore wind events.
Another cool day in the Windy City, but no snow. Some of the white stuff mixed with rain, however, is on the way. I'll let you know when in just a moment. We had clouds mixed with sunshine again today, but cool. Tonight, mostly cloudy with a low near -2. Tomorrow, periods of snow mixed with rain and a high near +2. Friday, mostly sunny with a high of 3. Saturday, mostly cloudy with a high near 7 degrees. Sunday, mainly cloudy with the mercury dropping to 5. Cooling off even more on Monday, clouds mixed with sun and a high of only +1. Tuesday, expect a high of only -1. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 10 degrees and an average low of -3. The highest temperature in the state was recorded in 1958 at 24 degrees, and the record low was a very cold -25 in 2002. Sunrise was at 8:16, sunset at 6:14. Let's see how tomorrow's shaping up across the country now. Expect an overcast day with a high of 10 degrees for Victoria. Clearing and 10 degrees as well for Vancouver. Periods of snow and a high of 3 degrees for Calgary on Thursday. Rain mixed with snow and a high of 4 for Edmonton. Overcast and 2 degrees for Regina. Expect a mainly cloudy sky and 2 as well for Saskatoon tomorrow. Flurries and 2 degrees for Winnipeg. Expect heavy rain at times and a high of 13 degrees for both Toronto and Ottawa. Showers and 16 for Montreal. Over in the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick should have rain and a high of 15. Expect showers and 16 degrees for Halifax, Nova Scotia. Charlottetown, PEI will also have rain and 14. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect a mainly sunny sky with a high of 11 degrees for Thursday. Canada's central bank is holding its key interest rate at 1.75%, where it's been for just over a year. Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Poloz is warning that persistent global trade conflicts and uncertainty will test our country's economy. Poloz also said that Canada is beginning to feel the effects of a deteriorating global outlook. Facebook has agreed to pay a fine of more than $840,000 without admitting any liability in a privacy case stemming from the Cambridge Analytica scandal. The Information Commission Office in Britain levied the fine after concluding the social media giant processed the information of users by exposing it for use by app developers without informed consent. The company says it has since made major platform changes which restricts information accessible by app developers. Maple Leaf Foods says its third quarter profit fared nearly 50% to $13.4 million in the third quarter. The Toronto-based company says strong performance in prepared meats, value-added pork, and plant protein was offset by investments in volatile hog prices and the Chinese import suspension of Canadian pork. Sales were up nearly 14% to almost $996 million. Maple Leaf says it earned 3 cents per share on an adjusted basis. That was well below the 31 cents that analysts were expecting. Plummeting cranberry prices has the cranberry industry eyeing some much-needed help. That assistance may come in this form of solar power. Cranberry farmers south of the border are proposing to build solar farms above their bogs.
So it costs $32 a barrel, which is 100 pounds, to grow cranberries successfully, and right now we're getting paid $22, which is the same amount of money my grandparents got paid in the 50s to grow cranberries. When you harvest the cranberries and bring them in, you really never know what you're going to get paid for them until about a year later.
And so that's where the solar project comes in, is that it's a different type of revenue stream.
If solar panels do end up going up on the bog, we'll be paid so much an acre to run the bog for the solar panel company, and that's money that you can actually count on, that's real, that you know that you're going to get that money every single month. That'll help plan so we can, purchase like the fertilizers and things we need to purchase, and you'll know that you have that income coming in. It's a big help.
Where the berries are, there's a significant amount of them in here. I think dual use can happen. It can work. I've grown cranberries out here right now that I'm going to go pick myself. This bog was not set up to do that. If it was done smarter and better with the things we've learned, I think it can happen.
Cranberries are an understory plant, which means that they grow underneath other types of plants. So their genetic need for a lot of light is much lower than for other plants.
My research tries to look at the whole production system. So we're trying to look at how these solar panels affect the microclimate underneath the solar panels.
We don't like the idea of being a farmless society up here, so those of us who've done it our whole lives are going to fight to continue to do it, in spite of all the challenges, because it's so important.
Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 83 points on the day to 16,501. The Dow was up 115 points to 27,186. The S&P 500 was up almost 10 points to 3,046. And the Nasdaq was up 27 points on the day to 83.03. Oil was down 64 cents to 54.90 per barrel. Natural gas was up 5 cents to $2.69. Gold was down 61 cents to $14.95 per ounce. And silver was down a cent to $17.85 an ounce. Wheat is at $222 per metric ton. Barley's at $216. Canola's at $4.54. And corn is at $281 per metric ton. Live cattle was up 3 cents to $114.43. Feeder cattle was up 60 cents to $146.20, and lean hogs were up $1.45 to $66.48. The Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 75.97 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the Alberta government is looking at rolling back wages for more than 180,000 public sector workers. Finance Minister Travis Taves will ask arbitrators to impose an average 2% wage cut in 30 upcoming public sector wage cases. Now, in some instances, however, the UCP will ask for reductions as high as 5%. There's some federal Conservatives who want to see Andrew Scheer replaced as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilly, has details next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. Come out and support a worthy cause. The 5th annual Pig Roast fundraiser in support of the construction of a medical clinic in Uganda is taking place Saturday, November 2nd at Miss City Church. The evening will include a delicious pork dinner and program. Doors will open at 5 p.m. Tickets are $15 and can be purchased at the Bridges of Hope office by calling 403-380-3844. A Victorian Prairie Christmas is taking place November 13th and 14th from 1 to 4 p.m. at the Galt Historic Railway Park, north of Stirling, Alberta. Enjoy a beautiful and festive atmosphere featuring live entertainment, delicious food, and Christmas pudding with rum sauce. Admission is $20 for adults or $18 for groups of 5 or more. Pre-book today by calling Jeff DeBoer at 403-327-2854. And for more information, visit galtrailway.com. The Downtown Lethbridge BRZ is looking for volunteers to help with the Downtown Holiday Market taking place Saturday, November 23rd. Volunteers will be assisting with setup and takedown, handing out popcorn and hot chocolate, and the best job of all, helping Santa Claus. For more information, email Tasha at tasha@downtownlethbridge.com. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
A new Ipsos poll says many Canadians want to see Andrew Scheer gone as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. To talk more about it and other big political issues is our political contributor, Brian Lilly. Brian, why are so many people wanting to see Scheer step aside as leader?
Well, you have to look at who those people are, and a good number of them, well, they didn't even consider voting Conservative. So if you're talking to Liberal and NDP voters, they just want to have a bit of schadenfreude and see the misery of the Conservative Party. The important thing for Scheer is, what do his MPs want? What do his caucus members want? What do the rank and file want? You know, that got to remember how he won. He won by convincing enough members of the Conservative Party to vote for him as their first, second, or third choice. That's what it came down to. And a general poll of Canadians determines how we may vote, but it doesn't determine who leads a particular party. Scheer is in trouble, though. The knives, I was writing about this in a column earlier in the week. The knives were going in his back. Now they're coming at him from the front. Terrence Young, former Oakville MP from 2008 to 2015, says he's got to go. José Werner, former cabinet minister, says he's got to go. Sylvie Fréchette, the star candidate, former Olympian in Quebec who didn't win, said he just simply didn't connect with voters in Quebec. More importantly, he didn't connect with voters in around the 905 area surrounding Toronto, the big suburban seats that should be conservative bread and butter. He didn't win at all. So I think Andrew Scheer has two choices. He either has to clear house, shake up the house, kind of like a general manager when the hockey team's not doing well. Do you fire the coach? Do you trade players? Those are your options. If not, and you can't find a fix, then maybe you have to be the one that steps aside. So headline on one of my pieces, Scheer has to step up or step down.
Are many of these MPs, however, even former MPs, more supporters of Maxime Bernier, perhaps, with the leadership review originally instead of Andrew Scheer? So maybe they weren't in his corner to begin with.
Not necessarily, I wouldn't say. Bernier did not have a ton of support out there, especially not among Quebec MPs. So I wouldn't put it down to that. But there is a lot of griping saying that things did not go well. Now, the Conservatives have been having for the past couple of days a meeting in Ottawa. The caucus has been hearing from their leader. He's been hearing from them. The downside is one of the messages that Scheer was putting out to people in caucus was saying to his MPs and candidates, hey, we just got unlucky. We got to do more events. That should not be the lesson that you take away from this campaign. They did a lot of good things. Absolutely, they did a lot of good. They won the popular vote. The number of votes the Conservatives took went up by more than 600,000. He won more seats than they won in the last election. All of those are good things. They held Justin Trudeau and the Liberals to a minority. All good things he can point to, but they didn't get the brass ring. So you got to be a bit more introspective than just saying, we'll do a few more events. More barbecues, Hal. That'll solve it.
What about Jagmeet Singh? I mean, he lost 15 seats compared to 2015, and yet people are not calling for his head.
Yeah, and I was speaking with Anne McGrath, one of the regular contributors on a lot of political shows and former campaign manager for the NDP under Jack Layton. And she said that, it's about expectations. Jagmeet Singh was not expected to win power. He was not expected to do well. He was just going to be wiped out. They were looking at, will they keep official party status? And, well, they did that and more. Scheer himself put forward the expectation that he was going to win power. In fact, he said he'd win a majority. And of course, he didn't. So this is why managing expectations can be so important in politics. If Justin Trudeau were not still prime minister, you can bet there'd be calls for his head, that he'd have to go. But I don't know. The NDP is a little strange. Tom Mulcair had the best showing, or second best showing the NDP ever had, right after Jack Layton's 2011 Orange Crush, and he got turf right away. Jagmeet Singh took them from 39 seats, I believe it was, down to 24, and he's having a good day. He's dancing and celebrating. It makes no sense to me, but this is the world of politics.
Maybe it's all about perspective. Now, Brian, our country is feeling more divided now than ever since the election. To deal with fractured feelings, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has appointed a pair of Canadians to his transition team. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that it's going to work. He's appointed Anne McClellan, who used to be an Alberta MP, Liberal cabinet minister under Jean Chrétien, and Paul Martin. She used to be Landslide Annie, they called her. She was always just hanging on by a thread to win the seat up in Edmonton that she held for so long. But is she the right voice for Alberta? Is she the voice that Alberta needs to be heard? I'm not sure. He's also appointed someone to his transition team from Quebec. Of course, there's been the rise of the Bloc Québécois, but the Liberals still hold more seats. They took more of the popular vote in Quebec than the Bloc did, as opposed to Alberta and Saskatchewan, where they're pretty much shut out. But he's appointed a woman named Isabelle Hudon to his transition team, and she has a long and respected career in and around political circles, but mainly coming out of the private sector. Working with insurance companies and sitting on boards and taking executive positions, that sort of thing. So, I mean, they'll bring some perspective. I'm just not sure that when it comes to how people west of Winnipeg are feeling, that Anne McClellan is the right voice. She better be willing to talk truth to power instead of just telling Justin Trudeau that he's doing great. Otherwise, this is not going to help at all.
There was even a rumor that Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi would become a special advisor to Justin Trudeau. What have you heard?
Nenshi has put forward that he'd be willing to advise. I don't see him leaving his position to go sit in the Senate, which is another bit of speculation that's been out there. He's mayor of one of the biggest cities in the country. He has a lot of profile. He actually has power. If he were to go and sit in the Senate, he'd have no power. And if he were to be a cabinet minister, that wouldn't really change. Not the way that federal governments are run these days. You're mostly being told what to do by the people in the central office. So, he's in a pretty good position right now, reelected with a fairly strong mandate from the people of Calgary. I would stay where he is, but both he and former progressive conservative premier Alison Redford have said they are willing to advise Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on dealing with Western alienation and the fact that he was shut out of Alberta and Saskatchewan.
And Redford also went on record to support Trudeau over Scheer in the last federal election. I remember that as well.
Oh, you could clearly hear that in our commentary.
Now, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe-Brien is offering to go to Ottawa to meet with Trudeau and push his new deal for Canada. What does that look like?
Well, for him, it looks like either a change in equalization or the ability to get products to market. Saskatchewan has different problems than Alberta. Of course, Alberta mainly it deals, the big concern is about oil and gas pipelines and about getting those products to Tidewater. Saskatchewan is less oil dependent, like Alberta, a lot of agriculture, but they are major exporters to markets like India and China. And Canada has trade problems with both of those countries right now that Justin Trudeau hasn't been able to fix. In fact, he's only exacerbated it. So, it's different reasons for the Western alienation. And so I think that Scott Moe's going to be looking for a bit of bit of help, a bit of a boost when it comes to getting pulse crops out of his province and onto world markets, dealing with the fact that canola has been shut out. But like Alberta, though, the province is united with its neighbor in saying this equalization thing does not work for us if we don't get something out of the deal as well. Now, if he goes and tries to knock on Justin Trudeau's door, he might find that Doug Ford's already sitting, waiting there because, the Ontario premier said he wants to be first.
Right. Now, one of the very contentious issues as well this past election was the expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Are we going to finally see shovels in the ground? Brian, TMX says it's now adding thousands of jobs?
Yeah, 2,300 jobs, I believe, is the exact number that they've been trying to add since the end of September. The problem is I don't know what they're going to be doing because every time they attempt something, this pipeline gets shut down by protesters. It gets shut down in, court proceedings. I hope that it goes forward. But I told you at the beginning of the summer how you were saying, oh, look, no, they've said we're going to get it built this summer. And I said the only people getting work this summer is going to be the lawyers. And here we are, the end of October. The pipeline hasn't been built. They're starting to hire people. What's construction season like in that Alberta through BC over the Rockies corridor? I'm guessing the winter can be a little bit harsh.
Oh yeah, very much so. In Ontario, Premier Doug Ford is rallying with other premiers for a national unity push. Brian, you spoke with the Ontario Premier. What was that all about?
Well, Doug Ford is trying to take on a role that Ontario premiers have done before, and that's trying to bridge divides. Past premiers, be it Bill Davis in the 70s and 80s or Bob Rae even in the 1990s, they've done this sort of thing and acted as go-between. It used to be between the rest of the country and Quebec. Now Doug Ford says, look, I'm good friends with Scott Moe. I'm good friends with Jason Kenney. I get their problems, and I want to bring them to the national stage. I think there's a couple of things going on here. I think the Ontario Premier really believes that Alberta and Saskatchewan are getting a raw deal and that we need these pipelines like TMX built. But also I think he sees that if he unites with Moe, with Kenney, with even Francois Legault on some issues, they can be a powerful counterweight to the Prime Minister's office and what Justin Trudeau wants. Because, Justin Trudeau is a weakened Prime Minister. Yes, he's still PM, but he's got 27 fewer seats than when they left it, compared to the last election. He also has just 33% of the popular vote, the lowest ever recorded by a governing party in Canadian history. So he is a weakened prime minister, and Doug Ford and the other premiers can take advantage of that. But it's good to see that Ford is championing the issues of Western Canada.
Yeah, that is good to see. We appreciate that here. Two of the biggest business stories we had recently on Bridge City News was that SNC-Lavalin stocks went up, while around the same time Husky is laying off hundreds of workers in downtown Calgary. Is this not a big part of the reason why Western alienation and talks of separatism exist?
I really do think so. I mean, people woke up to that news after the election saying, oh, come on. Obviously people believe that SNC is going to get a special deal. And obviously Husky says that they didn't do this and they didn't wait until after the election. I think they clearly did. They wanted to see if there was going to be a change. If there had been a change in government, perhaps they would have held on a little bit or been more temporary layoffs. But, obviously there is a lack of business confidence. And, well, not just the oil patch, but some other sectors as well. We've had layoffs in the auto sector in Ontario, not as big as the oil sector, but there's a bit of a lack of confidence among some in the business community saying, well, with these guys in charge, with increasing costs, it's not a good scenario to be doing business in Canada.
The Business Council of Canada recently released a report urging the incoming Liberal minority government, Brian, to develop a strategy on how to make our country more prosperous.
Yeah, and that includes a big increase on the number of immigrants that we take in each year, more skilled immigrants, and in trying to do what people have been talking about for about 100 years, since Laurier dubbed the 1900s Canada's century. We never really got to what I think the potential of this country could have been. And to some degree, that's what the Business Council of Canada is doing again. Interesting that I believe this is the organization headed up by John Manley, a former Liberal cabinet minister, and not necessarily falling fully in line with where the Trudeau Liberal government is going, but a powerful voice nonetheless, and one that probably should be listened to. I know that immigration was a bit of an issue. I think during the election, I think that most Canadians will support increased immigration if done properly, if the rules are followed, not relying on things like temporary foreign workers programs, not allowing people just to walk across the border unchecked. A regular, steady stream of immigrants that go through proper channels normally has the support of the majority of Canadians.
Brian, before I let you go, I want to get an update on our new fighter jets. What's the latest? Are they arriving soon?
No. We'll have a potential for having everything sorted out by the time the next election is over. That's the sad part. If we had picked the F-35s, they would be arriving already. This would be a done deal. But remember, in the previous election, defense was a big issue. And Justin Trudeau said, we're not going to take the F-35s, but we'll pick a new plane soon and we'll get on it. Well, that election, came and went. The next one has now come and gone. There was no discussion of defense, but there's still no planes either.
Wow. Keep our fingers crossed sooner rather than later. One of our regular political contributors, Brian Lilly, joining me once again from Toronto. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you, Hal.
Canada used to be considered a Christian nation, but it appears as though we've become more of a pluralistic society featuring many different religions and cultures. To talk more about it is Professor Irving Hexam, Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Calgary. He's also the author of the book entitled Encountering World Religions. Irving, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you very much for having me on the program.
Now, do you believe each culture and every human being has a built-in longing for the divine?
I think they do, and this is the point that's made by St. Augustine in his Confessions. My heart finds no rest until it finds its rest in thee. That's what Augustine said of God himself when he was a seeker.
Now, many years ago, I had the opportunity to interview a monk at a Buddhist temple just outside of Toronto, Venerable Ratanasiri. He was telling me that Buddhism is more of a philosophy than a religion. Now, would you agree with that?
I think, yes, in terms of Buddhism, what can I say, Buddhism proper, the hardcore of Buddhism. What one's got with Buddhism, and you have it with many religions, is that there is the central teachings and the central practice of the religion, and then there's the popular expression of it. So with the monks and people who are totally devoted to Buddhist philosophy, then it's very much a philosophy, although a philosophy with very strong religious elements. For ordinary people, it may be very different. There can be a lot of even gods within the daily worship of the ordinary Buddhist. But for true Buddhism, the idea of having a god that's in any way important is anathema. I mean, God is unimportant to their existence because God doesn't exist. I mean, there is no such thing as a God for the Buddhist.
So, outside of God and reincarnation, which the Buddhists firmly believe in, what are some of the other fundamental differences between Christianity and Buddhism?
Well, I think that the biggest one is the fact that in Christianity, we talk about people having souls, and you find that in many religious traditions. And by soul, we mean that there's the essence of the person, and that there's this essence of a person continues in the Hindu traditions. It transmigrates to another body. In Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, it goes to heaven. But there's this essence, which is the person. In Buddhism, the very idea of a person is a wrong way of thinking about life. There is no person. That's the central doctrine, just as there is no real world, because everything is an illusion. And so you've got to come to the realization that there is no self in reality. The fact that we think there's a self, this is illusory, and we've got to learn to overcome that. And that may take many, many centuries, because the consciousness, which makes us believe that there's a self, it transmigrates to other existences throughout time. And it's breaking this chain of transmigration and moving on of reincarnation that you've got to do. That's the central point of Buddhism. And what happens then? Well, we really don't know. The Buddha said, where does the flame of a candle go when you blow it out? And his disciples, of course, wondered about that. And he said, well, this is what nirvana is. This is what we're going to achieve. We're going to lose this sense of our personhood because there is no self. And we've got to get beyond that. And everything that goes with the self in terms of consciousness of the world and our clinging to this world, wanting to continue our existence, that's illusory. And we've got to break that chain of false impressions.
So, Irving, any thoughts on how a Christian can befriend a Buddhist and engage in a conversation on spiritual issues?
Yeah, well, I think as with all other religions, I don't think it's just a Buddhist. The first thing one's got to do is to simply befriend them. And we've got to remember that in Christian teaching, all human beings are made in the image of God. So we've all got a God-centered life in a certain respect. God made us, and he made us essentially the same. There is this, as we started out saying, there's this inner sense of the divine that causes people to seek God or to seek some sort of solution to what life is really all about. And that's the starting point. So in the first instance, I think one's got to, when you meet people of other faiths, one's got to realize that they are very much like you and like me. And we've got to befriend them as people. And we've also got to realize, I think, when we talk about people belonging to other religions, and in our increasingly pluralistic society, many people come to Canada from other places with different religious backgrounds, as they have done, in fact, throughout Canadian history. And they bring the baggage of their religion with them. If their mother and father were Jewish, they're Jewish. If they were Buddhist, they're Buddhist. If they were Hindu, they're Hindu. If they were Muslim, Jew, you go on like this. But the fact is that many of these people are simply secular. They're very much like the ordinary person, the ordinary Canadian who comes from a Christian background, that really doesn't practice their religion except for Christmas and for certain celebrations. And most people belonging to other religions, possibly with the exception of Muslims, who tend to be a little bit more practicing in terms of their commitment, but most other people, the religion is something that's there, and it's something that they're aware of, and if they're pushed on it, it's important to them. But in daily practice, they're very secular. They're just like the average Canadian neighbor who came from a Christian background but never goes near a church, except maybe when they want to get married, or maybe they have a child and they think, well, really, granddad would like the baby to be baptized, we better get it baptized. And this is the level of practice of many other people belonging to different faiths.
I have some friends in the Greater Toronto area who refer to themselves as Christian Buddhists. Now, is there such a thing?
I think in terms of Buddhism, this is a possibility to call yourself that. I don't think you can really call yourself a Christian Muslim or a Christian Hindu, but with Buddhism, because it's a philosophy about the nature of life, you can sort of incorporate things together in a way that makes a certain amount of sense. I don't think it actually holds in terms of the basic teachings of either Christianity or Buddhism, but there is an overlap, let us put it like that, where they're both talking about very different things, about a very different view of reality. And to be a real Buddhist, to take Buddhism really seriously, you can't be a Christian Buddhist because Christianity believes that there is a person and Buddhists believe there isn't a person. So, that's totally contradictory. And yet, Buddhists can be very accommodating, let's put it like that.
Can you explain what the basic beliefs are of Hinduism? And is it true that they worship more than one god? Like maybe even thousands of gods?
This is probably the most difficult thing to teach in a university when you teach an introductory course to world religions and one starts talking about the Hindu tradition, because Hinduism is a vast amalgam of beliefs and practices. And within it, there can be many different views. You can be a Hindu and a good Hindu and be an atheist. You can be a Hindu and you can believe in one God. You can be a Hindu and you can believe in millions of gods. And they all sit together within this general framework. Being a Hindu traditionally has been much more of an ethnic reality than of a religious reality. You're born in India, you're born into the Hindu tradition, you're a Hindu. But in terms of belief systems, it's a very multiplicity gone wild, really, because Hindus can believe so many things, one can't really generalize. Yet, having said that, in terms of the Hindu tradition in Canada, many of the people who come here are Hindus in terms of their family practices, the holidays they hold, and things like this, and also in terms of their belief. And probably the dominant belief of more educated Hindus would be something that's called Vedanta. And that's a particular type of philosophy which allows for the existence of a godlike being, and for people to have souls and to have communication with this God. And it can be very monotheistic. But then you can have also sorts of other gods who can either be gods in their own right or can be expressions of the one reality, Brahman. So you name it and you can believe it within the Hindu tradition.
Why do Hindus revere the cow so much?
This is a good question. This is because not only the cow is an expression of the divine, and the cow also provides all sorts of other things for us, like milk, and it helps us. It varies. I mean, many Hindus really don't revere the cow. It's much more in India where the cow is very much revered, but the cow is seen as a giver of life. And this comes through the milk and things like that. And most Hindus would not eat meat. They would be vegetarian. And so they live alongside the cow. And also, one's got to remember within the Hindu tradition, very much you have the transmigration of the soul. And the soul moves from one body to the next at death. And you can be reborn as a cow, you can be reborn as many things. And so, depending on the strictness of the tradition, and this would be true within the Buddhist tradition as well, you really have to have great respect for animals and other creatures, because you may end up being one in the future. And so you ought to treat them well. Now, in practice, these things don't always work that way. In practice, there are animals that Hindus don't like, and they can treat animals badly, or they can treat them well. But in theory, we can all end up being an animal, and therefore we ought to watch how we treat them.
So, Irving, what are some of the commonalities between Islam and Christianity? Did it all begin with Isaac and Ishmael?
Well, it all begins with Abraham, really. I would call them Abrahamic religions, and that would mean that initially you have Abraham, the patriarch, and from Abraham you get the Jewish tradition coming forward as the first major tradition, believing very much in one God, and in this God being the creator of this world, and of God creating a covenant with human beings. And these are the shared beliefs. And through history, particularly the history recorded in the Hebrew Bible, we see how the Jewish people responded to this revelation of God. And this revelation of God develops over time until we get down to the time of Christ. And then at the time of Christ, a major transition takes place, both within the Jewish tradition and outside of it, in terms of the development of Christianity. A lot of Christians think that when we talk about Judaism, we're talking about the Old Testament and the beliefs of the Old Testament. But the Jewish tradition develops way beyond that. Judaism really dates from the same time as what we know as Judaism as it's practiced today. Let me be very clear on this in terms of the synagogue and how Judaism develops. It developed alongside of and in interaction with Christianity. And then in the 7th century AD, you get the rise of Islam. And Islam draws very much on the Jewish tradition, very much on the prophetic tradition found in the Hebrew Bible, but also it draws to a large extent on certain Christian teachings. So you find Mary and Joseph and people like this within the Muslim tradition, and Muslims have normally great respect for Jesus as a prophet, but they don't believe that Jesus is actually the incarnation of God.
You know, it's funny, and an imam that I interviewed many years ago as well, to expand on your point a little bit, he mentioned to me in the Quran that Jesus is mentioned even more times than Muhammad.
Yes, I think that's true. I've heard someone say that. I've never checked it out, actually, but I have heard Muslims say that, because Muhammad is the spokesperson through which the Quran was revealed to mankind. And Muslims don't believe that, as some Christians sometimes mistakenly think, that Muhammad wrote the Quran. They believe that God spoke through Muhammad, and the words which he spoke were written down by his followers, and they became the Quran. And therefore, the Quran is the direct word of God, whereas the Hebrew prophets and the Christian teachers initially were inspired by God. So we know in the New Testament that there's a difference between the writings of Peter and Paul and James. They've all got their own style, and we take that into account. And we attribute it to the fact that God inspired them. His Spirit spoke through them, but they spoke their own words. This isn't the case with Muhammad. Muhammad spoke, he recited the word of God, and it was God speaking through him. It wasn't anything to do with him whatsoever. And then within the Islamic tradition, you have another set of sources called the Hadith, which tell us all about Muhammad and what Muhammad said and did. And this provides a model for Muslims. So the Hadith provides a model, and the Hadith provides means of interpreting the Quran. But the Quran is not like the Bible is. It's not a historical document in the sense that men had something to do with it. It's believed by Muslims to be absolutely pure revelation directly from God.
Dr. Irving Hexham, Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Calgary and author of Encountering World Religions, thanks a lot for your time today.
Thank you very much indeed.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.